suspects are being. One case involves the FBI is now offering $100,000 to see for the police are releasing.
Welcome to Misty Mysteries, a true crime podcast where once a week I bring you a true crime case that is unsolved or mysterious. The true crime fact for this week is only 15% of serial killer victims are chosen randomly, meaning that 85% of victims are specifically chosen. Last week there wasn't an episode. I took the week off for my birthday, and I apologize, but this week we're right back, and I will be talking about the Flannan Isles Lighthouse disappearances. Have you heard of Anchor? Anchor is the easiest way to make a podcast. When I started Misty Mysteries, I didn't know where to go, and Anchor helped me get Misty Mysteries started without charging me an arm and a leg. Anchor is really my suggestion for anyone looking to start a podcast. It has tools that allow you to record and edit in-app or on the website. Anchor distributes your podcast on all the listening places such as Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Good Pods, and all your favorite listening places. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place, and best of all, it's totally free, all on Anchor FM and on the Anchor app. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse is a lighthouse on the Eleanor Moore Island, an island in the Western Isles of Scotland. This island it's right next to the windiest island in Scotland. It's very rocky, and it gets hit pretty bad with storms. Before there was a lighthouse on this island, there was a supernatural theory that shepherds had that if they brought their sheeps on a ferry to go graze, that their sheep would have twins. And then there was a Celtic church put on the island by Saint Flannan, and it had bothies, which bothies are small stone houses that remain unlocked for people to take shelter if needed. The island's lighthouse was built in 1899 by George Lawson. It had 4 lighthouse keepers who would rotate. They would do 3 on and 1 on shore for leave. On December 7th, 1900, keepers Donald MacArthur, Thomas Marshall, and James Ducat arrived to the lighthouse to begin their rotation of keepers. The superintendent of the lighthouse organization, Robert Muirhead, joined them to do a check and catch up with the keepers. He double-checked that everything on the island was in order and it was okay. He spoke with James about a heavy mist and some weather they had been having, and then he left the men saying goodbye, noting that they were safe and everything was in order. And from December 7th to 12th, the lighthouse was visible by a man who was paid on the mainland to monitor the lighthouse, and he would do this by looking through a telescope to look for any signs of emergency that the lighthouse keepers may show. The last day that the man could see the lighthouses, so on December 12th, Thomas Marshall started writing unusual logs in the keeper's logbooks. He said, "Severe winds, the like of which I have never seen before in 20 years. He also noted that James Ducat, who was being very quiet, and Williams MacArthur was crying, which, remember that these are seasoned lighthouse keepers, and it's very unusual for them to be feeling weird, I guess, on duty. December 13th, the men in the logs said there was a storm that was raging, and they had been praying. The final log for the men of this storm was on the 15th, and it was simply put as "Storm ended, sea calm, God is overall." So the odd things about these logs was that there had been no storm reported from the 12th to the 14th or the 15th. The next storm actually hit on the 17th. And on the 15th, ship, a steamship named the Archer, which was coming from Philadelphia to Edinburgh, passed by the lighthouse and noticed that the lighthouse light wasn't turned on, and that ship didn't dock in Edinburgh until 3 days later, when this was shown in their logs and brought to attention. And due to the storm, the relief ship, the Hesperus, wasn't able to make it to the island until Boxing Day on December 26th, with a Captain Jim Harvey and the relief keeper named Joseph Moore. So when they got to the island, Jim noticed that the flags that had been flying to indicate the keepers had arrived wasn't there. There was also no response to the ship horns, and there was no response to a flare that was sent up to indicate communication. Joseph Moore got on a little rowboat with some other men and headed to the island. He noticed that when he got on the island, there had been 3 large black birds staring at him, but he went on to go investigate and relieve these men. He came across a locked lighthouse, so he unlocked it, and when he got inside, there was no signs of any life, like no people, besides a pet canary in a bird cage. The clocks in the kitchen and in the lighthouse had been stopped. There was no fire lit, and the table was set for a meal, and the meal hadn't been touched, and there was a chair that was turned over, and all the men's coats were inside, which is weird for the men not to have coats or fire going in December in Scotland on a stormy island. The men had just basically disappeared with no trace. Moore went back to Jim Harvey, who sent a telegram to the Northern Lighthouse Board headquarters in Edinburgh, and also Robert Muirhead. So this was Harvey's telegram, and the talk was a lot different back then, so just bear with me. A dreadful accident had happened at Flannan's. The 3 lighthouse keepers, Ducat, Marshall, and the Occasional, have disappeared from the island. On our arrival there this afternoon, no signs of life was to be seen on the island. Fired a rocket, but as no response was made, managed to land Moore, who went up to the station and found no keeper there. The clocks were stopped, and other signs indicated that the accident must have happened about a week ago. Poor fellows, they must have been blown over the cliffs or drowned trying to secure a crane or something like that. Night coming on, we could not wait to make something as to their fate. I have left Moore, MacDonald, Boymaster, and 2 seamen on the island to keep the light burning until you make arrangements. Will not return until I hear from you. A few days after this telegram, Robert Muirhead, the superintendent of the Lighthouse Board, went back to the island to do his own investigation. So Robert knew these men, he recruited them, he had just been with them a few days later, and so he was very concerned about how or what happened to these men, where are they. He was the one who found those unusual logs I noted earlier about a storm that no one else had logged. He found ropes strewn about all over the rocks near the landing platform, which held a crate, as talked about on the telegram, that was 70 feet in the air, and that was now missing. Robert believed that the crate had been knocked down, and the keepers went to retrieve it, and when a wave came, like out of a cave or just came from the ocean, it took them out to sea. And this could either be that 2 of them were down there and it took the 2 out and the other one went to go rescue, or for some reason these experienced lighthouse keepers, all 3 of them, were down in stormy water trying to get this crate. Robert, so he believed that it took them out to shore or to the sea, but that's just kind of one of the theories, and it had a lot more questions from the actual Lighthouse Association or board, like why had no bodies washed up, and why would 3 experienced keepers be out there, unaware of safety or storms or waves. And let's kind of talk about some of the more different theories besides Robert's. So there's 3 that revolve around MacArthur, and he was known to, like on land, to be a drinker, and he had a very short temper, and he loved to fight. So the first theory was MacArthur. He started a fight, and during the fight, the men fell off the cliff and into the water. And this can go as 2 of them were fighting, and when they fell, the third jumped in to go save them, or they all were fighting and maybe just went down. And I would like to note that it said their mental states, being isolated on the island, weren't noted to be in the best, that they were kind of struggling. So their mental states being on edge from isolation, one of the men, and the theory again is most likely MacArthur, due to having a bad temper, killed the other 2 men, and then locked up the lighthouse, and then went and unalived themselves off the cliff. The third is that there was a ship that docked there, and remember there was bothies, so maybe, if someone was in trouble, they saw a lighthouse and a bothy, and they were like, oh, I'm gonna go stay there, if there was a storm raging. So the ships docked there, and then again, due to bad mental states, isolation, and maybe just tempers, one of the men, or maybe more than one of the men, hurt or killed these people, and to hide the evidence, they got rid of the people, and the 3 men ran away on a ship to start a new life. There's also a theory that 2 of the men, or even all 3 of the men, were in love, and they had a boat there, and they took off on the boat to start a new life, and if it was 2 of them, that they took the third person. So then we kind of have more paranormal or supernatural theories. The first is that the men were abducted by aliens. So Scotland is said to have a decent amount of UFO sightings and stories. And there was a mysterious storm no one else had proof of. And then they just disappeared. So, aliens. There's also that these men encountered creatures called water sprites. They are green-haired mermaid-type creatures that live in the caves and sink ships to drown sailors. If a human encounters the water sprites, they have to beat them in a rhyming duel. They have to have, the humans have to have the last word in the rhyming duel to live. And so one of the last kind of supernatural theories is that 3 large black birds that the Moor saw when he got to the island were actually the lighthouse keepers, and they disrespected the supernatural force people believed were on the island, and as their punishment, they were turned into these birds, and that's why the birds were staring at Moor. So rather the men were victims of an accident, like waves, or fighting maybe, they ran away, or they encountered something maybe more supernatural, or it was more of a violent end. The case remains unsolved 120 years later, and is a story full of mystery that so many people have built so many theories on and just had a lot of ideas about. I would like to thank you for listening to this episode. I know it's short, but I wanted to have a little bit more fun coming back after a break. If you would like to follow us on social media, I will have that in the description, where you can keep up to date on what's happening. Please, if you like this podcast, leave good reviews and share with friends that you think may like it. And I'll just thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next week.